Probably going to start the day out fairly mild, but temperatures will fall back through the 30s during the day. It'll be partly cloudy this evening. Will turn mostly cloudy overnight, lows 20 to 25. Cloudy tomorrow. There could be a rain or snow shower by late in the day. High temperatures will be up to 35 to 40. Some showers tomorrow night. Temperatures climbing through the 30s to near 40 degrees.
Right now it's 40.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Assemblyman Bill Nojay is our guest today. I'm Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran. Assemblyman Nojay, thanks for calling in.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always good to talk to you.
Assemblyman, Rochester Mayor Lovely Warren, she's been denounced by members of the Rochester Police Department and some of their family members because of her online posting where she said the situation in Ferguson, quote, started with an authority figure who had little regard for the young man's life. Now, this has people like Brett Pearson, who's the brother of slain Rochester police officer, not too happy. Mayor Warren says she's still very much against the suspect accused of killing his brother, Officer Darrell Pearson. The Democrat and Chronicle reports that about 2,000 people signed a petition early last week, there may be more since, to have Warren removed from office. Bill Nojay, can Mayor Warren survive politically after irritating much of the Rochester Police Department here?
If she stays to the city of Rochester, I don't think so. Because there are enough people in the city of Rochester who believe the false information coming out of Ferguson, so that at least the waters are muddied enough so that she's probably not going to take any big political hit in the city of Rochester and for the office of mayor. The problem, I think, for Lovely Warren is she is, in many respects, a great political talent. And if she wanted to go beyond the city of Rochester to, let's say, the county executive's office or United States Congress to replace Louise Slaughter someday, I think there's enough people in the towns surrounding the city of Rochester that look at this whole thing in Ferguson and think, what a horse, or what a crock of horse patootie. I mean, it's just, I don't think she's going to get much traction with a lot of the suburban voters by criticizing the police force.
There are 3 bills that were in the Assembly in previous years that could be brought up again by New York City area state lawmakers because of Ferguson being in the news, police body cams being one of those bills. Rudy Giuliani was on Fox News Sunday yesterday. He says he's changed his mind about the police being body cameraed. Giuliani was originally against. Now he's saying that the cameras would show that the police are usually right. Now, Queens Democrat Assemblywoman Barbara Clark pushed for body cameras for police in 2013. It did not go anywhere. Wondering, Bill, with Ferguson and the stories like that in the news, will this legislation be brought up again in the state assembly?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I originally was also opposed to body cameras simply because it sounds like you're coercing the police to do something, putting them on a higher level. I mean, my initial response was, when Barack Obama or some other elected politician was talking about, all right, let's put body cameras on you when you're doing your job, having your conferences in the White House or in the United States Senate or Congress or whatnot. The fact is, a lot of politicians have a lot of bright ideas for other people that they wouldn't want to impose on themselves. Having said all that, I did see the Rudy Giuliani interview, and I've listened to a lot of other law enforcement officials. And I think this, I am increasingly persuaded that it might actually cut in the favor of the police officers if juries could see the kind of conduct the police have to deal with out on the streets. I'll tell you, I drove an ambulance for 5 years with my town's ambulance department, and we had a lot of mental health arrests, a lot of situations where we were working with local police, with sometimes violent offenders, and if people on a jury or average Americans could see the kind of conduct and criminality that goes on every day on our streets, I think you'd probably find that the police were aided in their efforts. So I'm with Rudy Giuliani increasingly. I think you got to come up with a lot of protocols about how those cameras are used. It might have started as a bright idea to try to get the police But at the end of the day, the police might have the last laugh on that one because it might aid them more than the criminals.
Another somewhat related bill that did not go anywhere was pushed and written by a New York City area Assemblyman Nick Perry. Perry wanted to pass a law to prevent officers from taking away cameras during arrests or giving anyone videoing law enforcement, a difficult time or searching the camera. Do you think that bill will come up again with all this news out of Ferguson?
This whole area of surveillance is fascinating because there are no right answers, and you can argue it either way. What Assemblyman Perry, I think, is doing is really just trying to put into statute, into New York law, what the courts have pretty much already held, which is that merely videotaping a police encounter or a police procedure is not in itself illegal, whether it be a traffic stop or anything else. That's pretty well decided. The question is the taping itself harassment of the police officers if it's done in a certain way? If you're standing 20 feet away and merely taking a video, then arguably the police officer's work is not being interfered with. But if you put the camera, and I've had this myself, I've gone to public forums, and people stick these cameras right in your face, like 12 inches from your nose, and frankly, that's disruptive, it's distracting, and in the context of a police conduct, I think it would be come close to harassment, certainly potentially interfering with police work. So the question is, where do you draw the line? Is it 12 inches from the officer's nose? Is it 12 feet from the officer? Is it standing with the camera in between the officer and the perpetrator or the person being investigated? That obviously could be construed as interfering with police business. So the general principle of videotaping police conduct is one thing, but drawing that line and knowing where the videotaping turns into harassment or interference, that's really where the legislative drafting has to be done very, very carefully.
And you got to feel for these officers because, they do a lot of nice things, and that rarely gets videoed. Another piece of legislation that a New York City, a Democrat Assemblyman Mosley from New York City has been talking about, would make it illegal for police to do chokeholds. Bill, these three pieces of legislation we've discussed, with the Republican-controlled Senate, do you think the Assembly will be able to get these through? Because the Republican Senate is usually more pro-police?
Yeah, and by the way, let me comment on that chokehold and the restraining and the stop and frisk, because there's legislation out there in all these areas. I do not agree with those who would stop the stop and frisk. To me, that's good policing. And I also want to agree with something you said a moment ago, which is that 99% of police conduct is in public service. And I emphasize the word service. Officers are on the front lines, and there is a very, very thin blue line between order and chaos in our society. And anybody that doesn't believe that, just take a look at what's going on in Ferguson and some of these other cities across America, not only now, but repeatedly. Crowds can get out of control. They can do enormous damage, destructive damage, not only to property, but to human life. And the only thing that stops that from happening is an officer in uniform. I have had contact with police officers through the ambulance done, but also in other capacities over the years, and I have enormous respect for these people. Anybody that wants to challenge policing in America, you know what? Go and spend a couple of weeks out on the streets and seeing what they see, walking in their shoes, and then you can criticize. I'm not going to criticize 99% of that conduct, and I will defend the police officers because I know that if they're not there, then chaos in the streets results. There is a consistent history of that. So let's give them the respect that they're due. As far as stop and frisk, it's good policing when done in moderation and reasonably. It becomes harassment when it's overdone. I think that's another point Rudy Giuliani made, by the way, over the weekend, which I agree with him on. As for chokeholds, look, if you, again, there is no bright line here. Better a chokehold than shooting somebody. And you know something? If an officer, we still have, in a lot of our rural and suburban districts, we have police officers who are patrolling alone. They don't have backup, or if they call for backup, it might be 10, 15 minutes in arriving. I think the police officer's first priority has to be public safety and his own safety. And protecting the safety of somebody who's trying to swing at you or do you or others harm, that's the third priority. So the police training is very comprehensive. I have gone through the curriculum. I'm not an expert in criminal justice, but I can tell you I trust the people who do design these curriculums and training programs. And, of course, there's always room for improvement, I suppose. But I think all this criticism for so-called chokeholds and stop and frisk and so on is way, way overblown.
Yes, and again, you know, you got to feel for these guys and girls out there in the police force who, you know, do all these nice things all the time, and that never shows up on YouTube. Moving on to statements made recently by Senator Chuck Schumer. Schumer said this last Tuesday at the National Press Club, and it's getting a lot of coverage on Fox.
After passing the stimulus, Democrats should have continued to propose middle-class-oriented programs and built on the partial success of the stimulus. But unfortunately, Democrats blew the opportunity the American people gave them. We took their mandate and put all of our focus on the wrong problem, health care reform. Now, the plight of uninsured Americans and the hardships caused by unfair insurance company practices certainly needed to be addressed. But it wasn't the change we were hired to make. Americans were crying out for the end to the recession, for better wages and more jobs, not changes in health care.
Assemblyman Nojay, your thoughts on what Schumer said there, which he's, you know, Schumer's kind of sticking his neck out.
Well, it's an astounding statement, an astounding admission, and it tells you the following. Number one, I think Schumer's acknowledging the truth and the reality of what happened November 4th. Not only November 4th, this has been going on. Democrats have been losing in state and local elections nationwide ever since the 2009-2010 cycles after Obamacare. So in one level, Schumer is simply acknowledging the political reality of what's happened to them the last 4 years. But politically, the astounding thing is that Schumer has basically thrown Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi under the bus and hasn't done a whole lot for his own superior, Harry Reid. So what does that mean? It means that Schumer is offering something different from what the leadership of the Democratic Party, Obama, Pelosi, and Reid, have been offering. Why would he do that? Obviously, to position himself as the next generation of leadership in the United States Senate and for the Democrats nationally. He wants to be, I mean, and I obviously I'm not privy to his inside thinking, but based upon what he has said, not only in this one, but he's had a couple of things fairly close to this over the last couple of months, ever since November 4th. Schumer's positioning himself as the next generation, not is separating himself from Obama and separating himself from the heavy-handed tactics of Harry Reid and sort of the foolish round of Nancy Pelosi that resulted in the Democrats losing so much control of the House of Representatives.
We're talking with Assemblyman Bill Nojay here on the Newsmaker Show on a Monday morning, December the 1st. When we get back, we'll talk more with the Assemblyman about some state and national issues.
Start now at Brand Name Appliance, Main Street, Wellsville. You'll find Amana washers and dryers for as low as $299. And Amana stainless, gas, or electric ranges, just $399. Save up to $2,000 on GE kitchen packages, washers and dryers, mix and match, and get more back. Whirlpool top freezer refrigerator is just $4.99, or how about a Maytag stainless French door refrigerator for the amazing low price of just $12.99. These are just a few examples of the huge savings on all appliances now through December 3rd. Yes, now through December 3rd. In the electronics department, a Samsung 46-inch smart TV is just $5.99, or a Sansui 39.5 LED TV, only $3.29. More brands, more sizes, more savings at Brand Name Appliance, Main Street, Wellsville. And all the savings continue now through December 3rd on appliances and electronics. That's at Brand Name Appliance.
Now, back to the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran on AM 1480 WLEA.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran this morning, on live with Assemblyman Bill Nojay. Assemblyman, they're talking about pay increases possibly for state lawmakers. Wondering, are you for or against?
Well, I'm against it, and I think almost everybody from upstate New York would probably be against it. You know, what is driving this is that the upstate delegation tends to be either have a working spouse to supplement family income, or they have a job themselves separate from the legislative duties. And the cost of living here is a lot cheaper. So you don't hear complaints about pay from the upstate delegation. The problem is that in New York City, you've got, if you just look at who these people are, a tremendous number of them do not have a working spouse, and they do not have a second source of income. So they're trying to live on New York City rent and costs, which are very, very high, probably at least 50% higher than here in upstate New York. They're trying to live on that, and it's very, very tough for them. It's very tight. They turn what's supposed to be a part-time job, being in the legislature, into a full-time job. And it doesn't work out for them financially, which is why there's so much pressure. Having said that, I mean, holy smokes, how can you justify? This is a legislature where they don't read the legislation. They produce things like the SAFE Act without actually reading it. The corruption is rampant. Everybody knows that. Sheldon Silver and the Speaker of the Assembly, who the Democrats all vote for, is arguably the most corrupt man in American politics, which is saying something. How can you justify a pay raise when you keep cooperating with and going along with the flow on that? Now, whether it's going to happen, there's only 3 weeks left, realistically, for them to do it. They could call it on 3 days' notice, and there are rumors about coming back into session next week. But now Mario Cuomo, the father, checked into the hospital for heart problems. The governor is distracted. Have to be a long negotiation about whether or not there'd be a pay increase, and I just don't know that they might be running out of time. There's certainly a lot of pressure coming from the New York City rank-and-file delegation. Whether or not that pressure will result in a pay increase, well, we'll find out in the next 3 weeks.
Sources told Fred Dicker at the New York Post that the governor does not want to do the pay raise for state lawmakers either, and the sources told Dicker that without the backing of major newspapers, which Cuomo does not have on this one, that Cuomo would not want to move forward with something this controversial. Do you agree with that story from Dicker in the Post?
Well, I think the governor got his nose bloodied on November 4th. He expected a 60% plus support. He wanted a landslide. He had an opponent in Rob Astorino with no name recognition and no money. So he wanted to top the 63-64% that he got in 2010 against Carl Palladino. Instead, he wound up getting 54%. And Rob Astorino, a very weak candidate from the point of view of financial backing and name ID, got 40% of the vote, which is astounding. So I think Cuomo is going to tread very, very carefully on anything that he thinks is controversial. Even though he's just been elected to a new term, polling numbers affect your political capital, how much leverage you get, whether it be in Albany or Washington. And with the governor now being weakened as a result of November 4th, people are going to be looking every time a new Quinnipiac or Siena poll or Gallup poll comes out, people are going to be looking at those numbers. The governor cannot afford to have a further erosion in his political base. So going along or making it look like he was in some way part and parcel of a legislative pay raise when the public is overwhelmingly opposed to it would not be good for him politically. He would have to extract a big concession out of Sheldon Silver and Dean Skelos on something important to him. And frankly, I don't know what that is at this point. That would be so important to the governor that he'd be willing to go along with that.
Liz Benjamin and Fred Dicker are both reporting online this morning that State Controller Tom DiNapoli is going to do an audit on how much the governor spent on the Startup New York TV commercials. a lot of people, including yourself, Bill Nojay, have been very critical of the governor on the amount that he spent on the TV commercials for Startup New York. How tough do you think the state controllers will be on the governor's office on this one?
Well, there's no love lost between Andrew Cuomo and Tom DiNapoli. Remember, DiNapoli's political base is in the state assembly. He was a member of the state assembly before being appointed controller by vote of the legislature, with Sheldon Silver controlled. So he is beholden to Sheldon Silver and the assembly, not so much to the governor. In fact, there's a history there of bad relationships. So I wouldn't put it past DiNapoli to come out with a very tough report that would further weaken Cuomo, and who would it strengthen? It would strengthen Sheldon Silver and the legislators. It would play right into their hands. So it all does make sense politically. And, of course, those ads were over the top, abusive, a complete waste of taxpayer money. They were basically using tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to support the governor's reelection campaign. I think we should do away with that. I don't know why tax dollars should be paying with ads to promote economic development in that way, when in fact the whole program is largely a fraud. The Startup New York program is not creating jobs. It's a public relations tool for the governor.
Down just a couple of minutes here on the Newsmaker Show. Fred Dicker also reports there was a secret deal between Governor Cuomo and Dean Skelos, the Senate Republican leader. Here's Albany reporter Zach Fink talking about how Cuomo supposedly did not want to campaign for Democrats to win the state Senate in exchange for Dean Skelos not getting the state senators to campaign for Rob Astorino.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard that, and we certainly know that it had been preferable. We heard that there were some backdoor communications. We know that Cuomo was, visibly unhappy when he had to make a pledge publicly to support a Democratic Senate. So,
your thoughts there, Bill Nojay?
Well, I've been sharply critical of Dean Skelos for being essentially an ally of Governor Cuomo's, going back to the SAFE Act, $2 billion in tax hikes in December 2011. Other things that really have made Skelos for the last couple of years an extension of the governor's political operation. And there's no question, Fred Dicker usually gets it right, and he certainly got it right with this one. There was clearly collaboration between the Senate Republicans and Cuomo. I have been taking that message to our Republican state senators here in upstate New York. I think the Republicans from upstate in the state Senate have got to have a sit-down and a heart-to-heart with their leader, Dean Skelos. This guy is not helping upstate New York. He's certainly not helping the Republican Party and its candidates around the state. He's doing it to save his own political skin. And aside from the fact that it's disloyal for him to do that as a Republican and conservative, it's also, I think, not a good thing for upstate Republican senators to be voting for this guy as their leader.
Assemblyman Bill Nojay, want to thank you for joining us live here on the Newsmaker this morning.
Well, thanks for having me, Brian.
That was Assemblyman Bill Nojay here on AM 1480 WLEA, Hornell, New York. 9 o'clock now, time for NBC News.